I recently hit 5,000 subscribers, and to celebrate that milestone, I decided to make a video on my very favorite firearm. Choosing a favorite firearm can be tricky. You know, my favorite gun for carry is different than my favorite gun for home defense. My favorite competition pistol is a lot different than my favorite hunting rifle. So when I say favorite handgun, I mean the one I'm always excited to talk about, to share, and to shoot. It's my favorite purely for its vibes. There's no logical reason for this gun to be my favorite, it just is. And that gun is the Savage M1907. The Savage M1907 is a classic. And not only is it a cool gun, it has a really fascinating history that I just absolutely adore. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Albert Cyril designed the gun and obtained a patent in 1905. The M1907 descends from a pistol Savage submitted to the U.S. Army trials in 1906. The military version chambered 45 ACP and competed against guns like the Luger in 45 ACP and the Colt entry, which would become the M1911. As we all know, Colt won, but Savage did come in second place. And second place means nothing. It's the first to lose. The Savage 45 ACP pistols were there's only about a couple hundred of them designed and prototyped, so those are very expensive and very hard to find. However, the M1907 would become very common and very popular for Savage. Now, because Mr. Albert Cyril obtained the patent in 1905, a lot of times this gun is called the 1905. In reality, they may have patented it in 1905, but they didn't produce it until 1907. So at the same time they were producing the 1907, the pistol trials were still going on. Those started in 1906 and lasted till 1911. So while the Savage M1907 descends from that design, they were produced around the same time, if that makes sense. So the M1907 was a shrunk version of that gun that was much more compact and would become a very popular carry pistol in the United States. I often say that the M1907 is basically the SIG P365 of 1907. Both guns are semi-auto, both are striker-fired, both hold 10 rounds in a relatively small package, and both were specifically designed for concealed carry and advertised for personal defense. Obviously, there are some major differences, but it's kind of interesting to see that the demand for such a pistol has pretty much always existed, at least since the advent of semi-auto guns. The M1907 admittedly never came in 9mm, and you were stuck with either 32 ACP or 380 ACP. I have and prefer the 32 ACP variant. Now, the Savage M1907 is a very interesting pistol. Like the CZ75 and the SIG P210, the slide rides inside the frame, resulting in a very low bore axis and less reciprocating weight when the slide moves back and forth. The gun uses absolutely no screws, not even for the grips. You might say something like, well, neither does my Glock. Yep. But in that era, this was impressive. Guns like the FN M1900, the first pistol to have a slide, had screws, but the Savage did not. So that's kind of impressive. It's kind of interesting for the era. The M1907 has what I call an Art Deco appearance. It definitely looks unique. Now, the gun appears to have like a visible barrel, kind of like a Luger, but that's actually just a shroud and part of the slide. If you retract the slide, you'll see the actual barrel underneath that shroud. The gun also appears to have a hammer at the rear, but that's not a hammer. It's an external striker cocker. When you rack the slide, the striker is cocked, and the user could manually decock the striker by holding the cocker and pulling the trigger. And when necessary, they could also retract the striker cocker with their thumb and ready the gun for firing. On the left rear side of the grip, you have a manual safety. It's fairly easy to engage and disengage. The safety can also lock the slide open, but there is no provision for a last round slide hold open device. The magazine release sits in front of the grip and is the gun's biggest downside. While it's ambidextrous, it's hard to reach and very slow to use. It's kind of tiny and just not very ergonomic or intuitive. The Savage M1907 holds 10 rounds of 32 ACP or 9 rounds of 380 ACP. The gun uses a double stack magazine, and a lot of folks will credit the high power with the introduction of a double stack magazine in a handgun. But the high power was about 30 years behind the Savage M1907. As far as I can tell, it's the first handgun to utilize a double-stacked magazine, and this became a core part of the gun's advertising. Ads would read 10 rounds quick, and in an era where revolvers were the norm, the 32 ACP Savage M1907 offered a serious advantage. A revolver holds 6 rounds, but the Savage offered up to 11, nearly double the capacity in a pocket carryable gun. So, I kind of know which one I'd pick. Let's talk about the gun's operating system. When a projectile is fired down a rifle barrel, it rotates inside the barrel. The Savage M1907 supposedly used that rotational force to lock the breech. The barrel would rotate in the opposite direction of the bullet, which would supposedly lock the breech. In reality, this may have delayed the mechanism, but it wasn't a locking system. At best, it's a delayed blowback design. At worst, it's just kind of an expensive way to make a blowback gun. Years ago, Forgotten Weapons did slow-mo video showing the breech certainly isn't locked. I'm betting they believed this system worked, that Savage was like fully behind it. I mean, they couldn't exactly get a slow-mo camera to see if it worked. But admittedly, it allowed Savage to get around patents that use direct blowback designs like the FN M1900. So I think it's best described as a delayed blowback, if I'm being generous. But it's still interesting, and in 32 ACP, blowback operation's perfectly fine. One of the most interesting aspects of the M1907 was its marketing. Savage threw their back into marketing this gun. Savage was always ahead of the game when it came to advertising. These days influencer marketing is popular. Send your gun to Grand Thumb and you're getting a million eyes on it. And while it's common today, Savage seems to be the first gun company that recognized its potential. Now, Savage famously used the profile of Chief Lame Deer of the Lakota people as part of their advertising. If you look on the grips of this gun, you see a profile of Chief Lame Deer. And the story behind that is that Arthur Savage was approached by Chief John Fire Lame Deer wanting to purchase rifles for his tribe in New York. Lame Deer offered to allow Savage to use his profile in advertising in exchange for a discount on the firearms and for an annual fee. I don't know how true this is, but that's the story on the streets. Now, Arthur Savage, the owner of Savage Arms, would continue to use kind of an influencer marketing appeal, especially with the Savage M1907. Savage was able to gain Bat Masterson, a renowned gunfighter and Old West sheriff turned sports writer. Bat Masterson's one of those few gunfighters from the Old West that survived long enough to retire. He was kind of a contemporary of Wyatt Earp, I'd say. He was a major part of the gun's advertising and a ringing endorsement for him. And he also wrote a pamphlet, which we'll cover a little bit later. Buffalo Bill Cody also appeared in advertisements. Buffalo Bill was historically a six-gun man, but according to the Savage Arms ad, he received the Savage Automatic as a Christmas gift. He initially rejected the gun, but according to the ad, he took it out and shot 50 rounds from the M1907 and 50 rounds from his old Army revolver. He outshot himself with the Savage and scored higher with the Savage and gave it a ringing endorsement. Now, another ad featured a letter from Dr. William Carver, who was the world's best wing shooter at the time and a firearms expert. Apparently, he wrote a letter to Savage requesting 3 Savage automatics he intended to give to 3 women to defend against burglars. Savage also received endorsements from the Pinkerton Detective Agency and Detective William Burns. Detective Burns was known as the American Sherlock and was I don't know how to describe him, a private eye that was fairly famous. Now, while Pinkerton gave Savage the endorsement, apparently they never issued the gun, and I find that kind of interesting. Savage had piles of ads and would often appeal to women. They advertised the gun as a female-friendly option for deterring tramps and burglars. They claimed its design and ergonomics made it self-aiming. One of the ads takes the Joe Biden approach and talks about shooting 2 rounds as a warning shot, but still having 8 left. The ads were certainly a fascinating look at the gun's history and Savage's intentions and who they were advertising to and what they were advertising for. Savage even had 2 books written about the M1907. Well, saying book is kind of generous. It's more like 2 extended pamphlets. The first was It Banishes Fear, which was part advertisement, part technical manual, and part user's guide to the M1907. The second and more interesting was The Tenderfoot's Turn, which was a longer pamphlet written by Bat Masterson that was an advertisement from Savage disguised as a how-to guide for self-defense shooting. The art in The Tenderfoot's Turn is amazing. You can find PDF versions all over the internet. And I really appreciate the art with my whole heart. And I'd love to have any of these artist depictions turned into a piece of canvas for my office. Now, Savage didn't have Grand Thumb, but they did have some important figures that were both famous and experienced with pistols. And that kind of helped cement the M1907 as more than like a pocket pistol and a fairly, what they would describe at the time as an anemic caliber. Remember, it didn't start with 4, so you wouldn't take it to a gunfight. The M1907 was designed and advertised for civilian use, But the French did purchase like 40,000 of them for World War One, but they were purchasing pistols from everyone. Portugal also adopted the M1907 for their military. Kind of interesting. The M1907 was produced from 1907 to 1928. Well, kind of. There were some changes made which introduced new models, which were basically the same gun with a new name and some new features. In 1915, the Model 15 premiered with some changes, and in 1917, the Model 1917 came to be, which lasted till 1928. There was also a prototype of 25 ACP pocket pistol variants, but only 40 were ever created, so they're fairly rare. This isn't a review. The gun I'm shooting is over a century old, so I'm not telling you to go out and buy one for concealed carry. Go out and buy one because it rules. The 32 ACP version has barely any recoil. It barely moves as you pull the trigger. I could see why a gun like this would appeal to defensive shooters. 10 shots quick is no lie. I can empty the gun in less than 3 seconds from the low ready into an 8-inch target. The trigger is short and light, which is predictable thanks to its fully cocked single-action striker-fired design. And while the trigger is great, the M1907 does have teeny tiny sights. They aren't easy to see and they're not quick to use. People these days will claim you won't see your sights in a gunfight, and that's absolute rubbish. However, that saying comes from guys like Sykes and Fairburn who are dealing with guns like this with ultra-small sights. That was true in the era. Still, if you have time to line up the tiny front sight with a micro-sized notch, the M1907 is remarkably accurate. I could put all 10 rounds into an 8-inch circle at 15 yards, and that's not terrible for sights this small. Even as far back as 25 yards, I can put all 10 rounds into an IPSC-sized target relatively easily. Combine good accuracy with low recoil, and I would not feel underarmed with an M1907, especially N1907 or 1928 or beyond. In fact, while I wouldn't pick the M1907 in 2025, if I was for some reason stuck with one, I wouldn't feel all that bad about it. The biggest downside is going to be the gun's reliability. It's a century old, so I don't care that it chokes a few times while I'm shooting at the range. If it were a new production model, it might be more reliable, but there is a reason why revolvers stuck around for so long after autos premiered. They really were the more reliable option at the time. I don't care. I still love the gun. It's a ton of fun to shoot, and if you ever get the chance, take it. The Savage M1907 is just a cool piece of American concealed carry history. The Savage M1907 is pure Americana. It looks unique. It's really, really fun to shoot, and it was way ahead of its time in 1907 in terms of capacity and design. The history of Savage's marketing is an interesting example of how advertising has evolved, but also how it's stayed the same. I really love this gun. It's my favorite old school cool piece, and just my favorite gun of all time, for at least the time being. I want to thank everyone for watching. Thank you for helping me get to 5,000 subs. If you're watching at this point, if you want to like, subscribe, comment, all that fun stuff, please feel free. I do read all the comments, even the mean ones. But until next time, thank you guys for watching for real, and thank you guys for getting me to 5,000 subs. I hope everyone has a great day.